And good evening here on January 12 as we do the latest of the End Times update. And it's a great opportunity to be with you here tonight. We're going to jump right into it here shortly as we get into talking about what this is about. And I need to make room for the slide. The End Times update. What is the End Times update? So here we are, just giving it by way of introduction, a definition. It's a simple weekly report that connects the dots, connecting the Bible prophecies about Christ's second coming and current events, showing clearly the end of the age is happening now. Why should we be thinking about the end times? Jesus said many people will become careless and not ready as the end times came near, and I would throw out right at this point, this time in human history is different than any other time, with the events happening that Jesus said would happen at the end of the age. And I can't emphasize enough, this is a different time, a very different time. I want to take a moment and even go further talking about the times we're in. I tried to improve here on the graphics, and I just realized that for people who don't have a big screen, it would probably be very difficult to see the prophecies. When we say that we're trying to connect dots with current events and prophecies, we have come up with a list of prophecies, 21 to point, and we start with what Jesus said in Matthew 24 would be happening. We use that as the starting point, and then we go from there. And we talk about what even Paul said that's in addition to, or should I say fits in, but it's said another way than what Jesus said. Mention a couple things John the Revelator saw and spoke of. We talk about a couple things even Old Testament prophets saw. We have added another one that Peter said would be important at this time. And so here we have this this happening in our time period, these prophecies being fulfilled. And tonight we'll be talking about current events. But I'm not going to take the time tonight. I probably should. Well, maybe I will at least read down through them fairly quickly because they're hard to see. And I'm going to change the graphics next time around to try to make them just a little bit easier to see and understand. But here are the prophecies as we have them. And these prophecies that Jesus gave were in a response to the disciples asking what were the signs of the end of the age. And for Matthew 24, he says he'd already come out of the temple, and this is what stirred up the disciples' interest to ask this question. He'd come out of the temple there in Jerusalem on the Temple Mountain, and people were talking about these big stones and beautiful stones. And he had said, the day's coming, not one of these stones will be left on the other. Well, that really obviously stirred the interest of the disciples. And later, when he'd gone over to the Mount of Olives nearby for the disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew came to him and said, what were you talking about over there? What will be the sign of the end of the age? And this, when he gives a good number of other prophecies that later he said, all of these things will happen in one generation before the end comes. And so he starts out by saying that many would claim to be the Messiah. He said you'd hear of wars and rumors of wars, which were happening at that time. But as you read down through here, you realize that the intensity, frequency of things happening is part of what obviously was being referred to. He said, but the end is still to come. He said there'd be conflict between groups of people and countries. I can hardly read this myself. There'd be famines, there'd be earthquakes, there'd be disease. He said that his followers would be persecuted and killed. They'd be hated by all. He said many of his followers would stop believing and turn on each other, which is of great interest to me because it's almost like they couldn't take the pressure in the way he says it here. He said there'd be many false prophets, not just false messiahs, but many false prophets, people who were saying this is what's to happen, and they would deceive many. So the love of many would grow cold. As wickedness increased, said the gospel would be preached to all people groups, and then the end would come. This is very clearly a sequence he's talking here. Said the abomination, after he says the end would come, he says the abomination would stand in the holy place, which would be the temple there in Jerusalem. There'd be great distress in Jerusalem. Said false Christ and prophecies would perform great signs and wonders, with emphasis on the great signs and wonders. So that would be of great interest, no doubt about it. And so we have that falling in right in line with everything he said. Said there would be a global financial system. This is John actually speaking up in the sequence he talked of that fits here as well as any. There'd be a financial system where a mark would be required to buy or sell. Said there'd be terrifying catastrophic events in the heavens. Sun turned to darkness, moon turned to blood, falling stars. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, actually. On the earth, there would be the roaring of the tossing of the waves, some very major things happening on where people's hearts would even be failing for fear. So that Luke recorded these comments of Jesus. And then he said, at that time, the Son of Man would come in his glory. Quite amazing. Paul elaborates on that and says that Christ's followers would meet Christ in the air. Now, I apologize again for the graphics. Hard to read, especially if you don't have a big screen TV. But that's why I took the time to read. I am adding one more for those who have thought that's where we ended recently. And this is from the book of Peter. Part of this is because I've had quite a bit of feedback in recent weeks, recent episodes. Feedback from people who really do have a problem with this. And one of the biggest objections that I see over and over is the talk about, hasn't this just been thought about forever? And there is a point to that, but sometimes these people that I hear from are more than raising good questions. They are poking fun. And in fact, the number one criticism I get of any of this, and I understand this too because I see it happening over and over, that there are many people talking about the end times who are really they're putting out quite a push and selling quite a product in the process. We all have to make a living, and I understand that. In fact, I expect to make a living in things I do where I'm providing a service. But I understand the criticism because I do think that there are some big dollars being made off the topic, and I want to be careful about that myself. And tonight, those of you who have not yet paid your $50 to listen to this, well, just kidding. This is free. This weekly update is no charge. We don't plan to ever ask for a charge. I really feel it's important, though, the information be put out, because many people do not understand the times we're in, and I think it's important we share these times. In fact, I would encourage you to, if you have concern about friends or loved ones or know people who are interested, this is intended to be a quick, simple weekly update of what the prophecies are, but also what the current events are that really do support the fact that we are in the end times. And most people are still struggling with this whole concept. I'm still learning myself. Let's go on here now. To have these prophecies being fulfilled, certain things have to happen nationwide or worldwide rather. And that's why I'm going to give you here a thought about what kind of developments would have to happen for these prophecies to be fulfilled. There would have to be global physical distress. There'd have to be global persecution and prejudice. There'd have to be global apostasy and wickedness. The way Jesus talks about all these things and the numbers involved and the peoples involved. This is not a small scale sitting in Jerusalem mentality. This is big. There have to be global evangelism for him to say the gospel will be preached to all peoples in all languages. There have to be global translation for that to happen. There have to be global communications, global audio visual, global currency financial system, where we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. Some things are happening. Global ID system, global government. And when we talk about the Antichrist, or the abomination that is to stand in the holy place and eventually call for an end to sacrifice, there'd have to be a third temple somehow. Excuse me. And that, amazingly, is shaping up while you and I think on this here tonight, or in the days to follow, for those of you who watch after the fact. It's happening right now in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount Institute people have got all the things ready in place just as soon as there is a chance to get this temple built. They're ready, and in fact, even the heifers, that would be one of the first things to happen, a sacrifice of a red heifer, a perfect red heifer, has been flown to Jerusalem in recent months, weeks, from Texas, of all places, and they are prepared and ready to bring this temple into existence. But these things right here would have to happen, and they are happening. As many of us in America, in the Western world especially, are pressing on with life, and many of us totally oblivious. Many of us do not want to talk about it. I understand that. It takes us out of our comfort zone. We don't want to think about change of this kind in our lives. In fact, many people have this belief that they're going to be out of here, that there'll be a rapture that removes them, and they don't need to worry about any of this anyway, so why talk about it? I do think that a frank, candid Bible study, as I have had to do for myself, will cause you to realize that it's important to know what's going on, because there's going to be some trouble here in this world that we Christians in the church will face. There's no doubt in my mind, as a Bible study recently really did bring this into perspective. So, with this in mind, let's go ahead and talk about some current events. The number 3 prophecy we spoke of, there'd be wars and rumors of war, Jesus said. We've been talking a lot about Russia and Ukraine lately, and it seems like that's just going on and on, but there are things happening of significance there. We could talk about Israel and Iran. There are some significant things happening there. We're going to hear more probably by next week, actually, as Netanyahu is getting very, very much clear in his plan to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear capabilities. So we'll be hearing more about this. Of course, Iran is heavily involved with Lebanon and Syria, even Iraq and Russia. And that whole area over there fits perfect the geopolitical situation that is coming up to fit Old Testament prophecies, Ezekiel 38. Quite amazing things we would never have expected in my lifetime. They're shaping up, they're happening. But here is a kind of a new twist here this week, and this is all, things we share are they're current, they're happening right now. And this is significant because it could really involve our sons and daughters and people in the military. And that is that they're already talking, this whole thing with China and Taiwan is escalating, and we are becoming more and more involved. And now we have Japan and others who are involved, getting kind of sucked in on things, though committed to things as allies and countries that support each other. But here is an interesting comment. Austin says U.S. willing to use nukes to defend Japan as 2 nations boost military cooperation. So where we see China and Russia right now very much lining up and agreeing to defend each other and be of help and support, we have the United States and Japan very much lining up and making comments like this that I find most fascinating. And notice, and we talked about this, that when Jesus said there'd be wars and rumors of wars, and we talk about the intensity and the frequency, well, in this particular case, we have what is clearly an intensity that we've not had before. Since the Cold War, even back whenever, we didn't have this constant talk of nuclear this, nuclear that. Everything right now is the nuclear threat. Never before have we had it like this. So this is a critical time. that does fit some of, and we haven't had the communication that makes comments and headlines about the topic of war so prevalent. When much of the mainstream media is not talking about it, it's still out there, and it is coming on strong with the rumors of war, the talk of war, and we're seeing it right here. Let's go to the follow-up on that. China signals military response to the U.S. and Japan and accelerating their defense plans. So China is making a comment and is weighing in and is making it known that they're warning us that you two don't need to be, you two countries do not need to be lining things up here. That's going to only work against you. So it's escalating. It's intensifying on a regular, steady basis. Very, very fascinating. Let's go to another of the prophecies. We call it P5. There, Jesus said there would be famines. And I am interested that even with all of the recent storms out in California and all the snow and water and flooding that's going on, they are still talking. They're saying it's not going to change the picture that much, that there are still famines taking place. And here is talk of the famines on the West Coast. In this particular article, we'll go to another very interesting from the Nature World News. 90% of world's population faces dire threat from combination of extreme heat and drought. This is just a couple days ago, 3 days ago. Very much an article worth your read to realize that we are in a very interesting time in our world. And even though many of us in America, we might see a few empty shelves when we go to the grocery store and go, isn't that interesting? That's kind of weird looking. And think of just a supply chain issue. Much of the world is seeing it differently, and they are truly feeling the pressure of supplies being pulled back or less available. And this is part of when we talk about famine. It's not just people dying of starvation; it's people not having access to food as readily. It's an oppression of. It's a problem that develops as people go without food or don't have access to it. And this is saying 90% of the world's population faces a real threat in that respect because of heat and drought. Here's something I found very interesting. Some of you know that the World Economic Forum is meeting here, I believe, starting January 13th in Davos, Switzerland. And there's a new word that's been introduced that I find quite fascinating. I find it fascinating because I've talked about this very interesting thing that's happening in our world, where whether you use the word confluence, like all these rivers coming together to the ocean, or whether you talk about congruency, or you talk about accumulation, of all these things that Jesus talked about, they're happening very fast, but also in line with each other. It's not like there's just one thing or two things or three things. All these prophecies have things happening that are accelerated. Well, here is the World Economic Forum using a word. Actually, somebody there invented this word. They came up with it. They're very proud of it. They say that the world, it's caught on. It's called Polycrisis. Polycrisis. Now, tell me that's not interesting. Same idea. They're seeing it from a non-prophecy standpoint. They're seeing it from a non-biblical standpoint, but they are seeing that there are many things happening right now that pose a problem. And this article is quite interesting. I'm going to see if I can go to it just for a minute. They say the next 10 years are shaping up to be a transformational period for the world economy, which is under threat from a number of interrelated crises. And this fellow, let's see, talking about in a book, mega threats range from unprecedented debt chaos to global climate disruption. It goes on to say the world has faced each of these crises individually before, but experts, including Rabinian economic historian Adam Tooze, fear that these threats could morph into a singular polycrisis, a state of risk where multiple crises intersect to amplify their collective impact. And now one of the world's premier forums for international business and political cooperation agrees we are on the brink of such a crisis. So here you have we have this very interesting thing happening that, again, World Economic Forum, they're realizing that there are many things happening right now. And what's interesting, things they're talking about, they fit with what Jesus said would happen. It's a very interesting situation that's going on. And they've given it the word polycrisis, including the climate and the famine issues that are arising. Let's go on here to the next thing and just briefly mention, Jesus said there'd be earthquakes. That word again, SEISMOS, which is wave damage, not just movement of the earth, but movement of things that are damaging with airwaves and water waves. SEISMOS, wave damage. And we did have a big earthquake this past week in Indonesia. Felt clear down in Australia. You're going, yeah, that's been going on forever. And yes, they have. But I do want to, I also found, and I won't share it tonight, but I will show it again soon, a chart that does show, using our own agencies here in the United States and their data, that we are having more intense earthquakes than ever before since records have been kept. It's quite amazing, actually, and I want to bring that up. But just to say again, these are some interesting things. There are the earthquake swarm we talked about last week with the volcanoes. And by the way, you probably noticed the big volcano on the Big Island in Hawaii has, after a month of kind of lying sleep dormant, has erupted again. And that's amazing in its own thing, that people thought it was going back to sleep. But there are surprises everywhere. And here is one in Indonesia, an earthquake that did a lot of damage, and there are a lot of pictures online you can see. But what I mentioned about this, there are a number that are 6.0 or higher that are taking place in the last few weeks and months that make us again realize there are some things happening that the intensity is right now seeming to be more than the norm. And I'll bring up this other study soon to show that scientifically. So having said that, I want to go to, there will be pestilence. Sorry, this graphic doesn't show it clear. I'm so interested. COVID became known as a real pestilence, a worldwide pandemic that has caused problems. And now what they're showing and finding, and I've seen several articles, even CNN and otherwise, that are bringing out some of the results from the CDC VAERS, the place that records the adverse reactions, that not only did COVID cause a lot of problems, but the COVID vaccinations are causing problems in their own rate. Here's two articles out recently: explosive increase in cardiac symptoms after second injection. Very fascinating. That's second vaccination. That is rather interesting and very serious. And another one that goes with that: COVID bolsters trigger metastasis with the cancer. And in fact, I have a friend who had cancer in remission, and the doctors felt it was important to go ahead and get vaccinated here a few months ago. And one of the comments they made to me right off the bat, as they now had a new kind of cancer, was it was a shot that they'd taken, that they saw things turn around, that they had not taken prior because of another kind of cancer. And I don't know how right that is per se, but what science is now showing us is that there are doctors who are oncologists, cancer doctors, and they are seeing huge numbers of people that are now experiencing this, whatever the cause. And there, many of their speculation is that it is a vaccination. It's just amazing that, again, it's all part, whether it's the virus itself or the vaccination. It sounds like that the pestilence continues to go on and wear on in amazing ways. Very, very troubling that way. I bring this up every time because it's just the clearest. The gospel, Jesus said, would be preached to all people groups. And here is the Bible made by Tyndale House Publishers as they work with the Wycliffe Bible translators. And if you read this little square, this is on the inside cover. This is the Bible, actually, literally the Bible my wife purchased recently. And it talks about Vision 2025 and clearly talks about how that they believe that the Bible will be available in all languages here soon. And the goal is 2025. That's 2 years from now, if your math same as mine. But the significance is, Jesus said, when the Bible's available or preached to all peoples, then the end will come. And if this is truly, even in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, this is significant. And I don't know what could be clearer. If this was a standalone prophecy, we'd probably want to pay attention to it, wouldn't we? But because it's only one of many, and we're going through this congruency, this confluence, or WEF's word, polycrisis, there are many things coming together. And what's really intriguing is that many of them are kind of 2025 to 2030. This is all very, very significant, very significant, and worth thinking about for those of us who are just pressing on, making a living and existing here in the Western world. It's important that we understand some of the timing on things going on here. So yeah, that's significant. But I want to go to kind of an interesting story as we get toward the end of the night session. This is quite interesting to me because for years I have been hearing about coronal mass ejections, CMEs. And quite honestly, I didn't know much about these. I first started being concerned about blackouts or grid damage or grids down of power supply for our cities in America. When I had someone in 2014, I'm quite sure it was, I need to firm that date up, but who actually was the head of, or at least involved in the cybersecurity for our power and light company. And I overheard her talking one day on the phone she was a customer, and as we were working, and long story short, it was brought to my attention like a slap in the face that we were in a real threat of losing electrical power at some point here due to hackers and people involved with bad intent. And that kind of got my attention. I didn't realize how big a risk it was. And this person told me that it wasn't just our grid, it's every grid in the United States. There are countries back in that time actively working on and coming into our software programs nationwide and regularly staying up on everything that was being done with the one intent of being able to turn power off when they wanted to. That was her comment. And since then, she's gone to work for Homeland Security and has confirmed that is a very real threat and wants us to keep talking about it. But I've always thought that was it. She encouraged me to study EMPs, electronic magnetic pulses, as a weapon that some countries have intended to use, where all that's needed is that they send a nuclear warhead up approximately 36 miles in the atmosphere, and the entire nation, 48 states of the United States, would be powerless for up to 18 months. And that is literally in wartime papers that you can find online as the preferred warfare or tools of warfare, weapons of warfare by countries as China and Russia and North Korea and even Iran. So those things cross my mind, but I've had somebody else even tell me you need to be paying attention to the sun. And sure enough, right here this week, there are some very interesting things that have happened. And I'm telling you about the prophecies here. This one, Jesus saying there'd be catastrophic events in the heavens. And I do not think that the timing of this necessarily fits what Jesus said in the sequence of things, but it is of great interest to me. And remember we talked recently about how it seems so many of the things that are happening, if they're not the fulfillment of prophecy, they are setting the psychology, they're setting the tone to where we're even thinking about these things. We have people who are not studying the Bible, certainly not studying current affairs as if they fit connecting dots to Bible prophecies. They're scientists, but they are describing things and talking things that fit what Jesus said, whether they believe what he said or not. And this is one that certainly creates a bit of that mentality, because when Jesus talked about the catastrophic events that will take place in the heavens, excuse me, we have something happening this week where it came out that the sun, in fact, it's been being talked about for now several weeks, several months, but the sun is having sunspots and solar flares, explosions on the surface of the sun that are sending out a certain kind um, of energy and power that can be destructive. And up until recent times, it was not even a real thing to be concerned about. But the news is growing about something that happened this week, because starting about a week ago, it said dangerous sunspot that fired X-class solar flare has turned to the Earth, meaning the side of the sun that had this explosion. There are several spots they've even numbered on the sun, as this picture here shows. They have these solar flares that are going out with some danger to them. So here is this article. The next article that I saw: solar storm alert. X-class solar flare could hit Earth with power equivalent to billion hydrogen bombs. Billion hydrogen bombs. Coming, it takes about 8 minutes for light to travel from the sun to the Earth. But here you have this solar storm that, after an explosion on the surface of the Earth, is coming this direction. Then the next article: intense and unstable solar flare expected to hit Earth today, risks to satellites and power grid. And so these news articles kept coming, and this one's by the U.S. Sun. This was back on maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. But here you have these articles from different sources, and it wasn't just these. These were worldwide. Not hearing about it much, and I understand that many people would not want to put this out on regular news for the concerns it would cause, but I'm going to share it with you because I'm one not to hold back when it comes to just seeing things for the way they are and knowing what's going on. And we have to have our eyes wide open right now for what is taking place. And this was a real possible danger that scientists for years have been warning us about, the solar flares and the risk to satellites, power grid. They say if it were to hit a grid, in fact, there have been 2 or 3 times in other cycles. The sun goes through cycles and sending these out, but there have been other times that they did cause real damage. In fact, there's a story told back, I should know it off the top of my head. I've studied it before, where a solar flare did hit the United States back before high technology, and there were literally fires in telegraph stations because of this solar flare. So they can be very damaging. This week we had this happen, and interestingly, this next article: extremely powerful solar flare causes major blackout in South Pacific. Sure enough, it did hit the Earth. Fortunately, not a major continent. Fortunately, not the United States, but it did cause some blackouts in the South Pacific. Did you hear about that? I didn't either, unless you're reading and studying and listening to certain sources, me included. I am going to tell you what is taking place while the world goes on, oblivious, in many cases by choice, to what is taking place. But all the more reason we've got to be serious here about some of these things, because it will catch some off guard someday, sometime, somehow. One article that interests me is the sun is even more active than expected right now. How many times in recent weeks have we found ourselves reading these articles, and scientists are repeatedly saying things like this, that things are more than ever. We had twice as many active volcanoes a couple of weeks ago than the average, and nobody knows what. They're asking, what is going on? These are scientists. These are people that don't give a hoot about prophecy. And yet, here we have these things that are taking place, whether we believe them or not. A lot of people I talk to, they look at me. In fact, I've had people look at me with their eyes almost half crossed or looking up over the top of my head, and you can tell they're not wanting to think about it in a real way. And that bothers me, and yet I fully understand that position. I have been there. I went years not really caring, and certainly not wanting to talk about anything that might be different than what my comfort zone allowed. So there are many who are not wanting to connect the dots and think about what Jesus said or what the Bible says and what is happening right now in 2023 as we think about some of these things that Jesus said would happen. So some people say, do you really believe that this generation is different or that this time? I absolutely do. I have zero doubt. The more I study, the more I read, the more I understand. And I think the same would be for you. I really do. For those of you who are skeptics, there's some people who watch this, and I understand respectfully, you don't care at all about God or what he has to say or what the Bible says. In fact, you don't like it. You have an angst. You have a real anger about anything spiritual this way. I understand that, and I respect your ability to be that way. Respect you and your choices to be that way. But for those of you who might want to truly experience God and believe in him and accept his ways and take serious what he says is going to happen, I've got to tell you, this is very different than any centuries prior, any time in human history prior. It's extremely different. And I don't know how to say it more clear. I don't know how to say it. And there are many people, for those of you who are, by the way, are with me on this journey and study and comment, thank you for your sharing of information. I really do appreciate your candidness and thank you for being so open, but also so diligent yourself, because you share things that are good for me and help me in my own search as we continue to talk this amongst us. I understand that the comments are not as easy on YouTube here as they were on Facebook. I do still welcome comments, but I thank you too for all of you who are emailing. I told you last week about a young fellow named Preston who's over in Texas. I believe it's University of Northern Texas. We've had some good talks. Preston, thank you for your recent interest and talk. But it's this kind of thing, and many of you who do email me now on the side, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Many of you send links to things that I may not have seen, and I really do appreciate it. It means a lot because there are a lot of people counting on me to continue to talk it straight, and to help people to have an understanding and a good feel for what is going on here in the end times. So thank you for that. I'm going to wind this down. I do want to say I appreciate everybody. We do have a couple people, for those of you who I know this is a family group effort. It's my privilege to be here in St. Louis with Mark and Carolyn, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, as she is recovering from heart attack and stroke. And it's special to be with them. Mark's gracious and using his basement here again. Also for Donna Roger up in Indiana. He's had some heart issues here recently. Got a number of you folks. Susan, who recently had a hip surgery after going a couple months of them not knowing what was causing such great pain. But a lot of people who are regulars here who have some issues, and I just want you to know you're on my thoughts and my prayers, and someday we may want to share that in time. I want to start doing something to close things out, and that is, because we're not doing actual study group, I do want to give just a quick word of encouragement for people. After all, this is a time when we are going to be facing more and more oppressive type pressure, whether it's due to our faith or just because in the world that we're going through these times. And I want to start sharing some scriptures. Probably the one that is so meaningful right now to me is when Jesus told his disciples, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. As he overcame, we can overcome. And I just can't emphasize that enough, that we need to realize that it's as we experience him more and more in our lives, experience the presence of God, the power of God, his Holy Spirit, as he promised he would be here to comfort and to strengthen us and to lead us into truth, understanding. There is something about this that I really believe is at the key, at the heart of our dealing with all that is, and finding a courage and finding a strength to press on and live on, and not necessarily, and not live in fear. That's maybe the big thing, to have peace in our hearts. So let's continue to pursue that relationship with him as we can. Thank you all for this time. Feel free again to raise questions, give me thought, as it's good for you. And we'll look forward to next Thursday night, same time, same place, Thursday evening, Central Standard Time at 7 o'clock. God bless.